Alright, hello friends, this is Grappa, and today we actually have Yuuhime. So, I'm not gonna go over her skills, instead we're gonna go over a Mythbuster portion on what her skills do in different scenarios, because there's a lot of things to think about and cover. And after that, I'm gonna give you my thoughts on her kit and basically what I think about her. So yeah, let's just get straight into the video. Does Izanami's Hell Hand stacks increase even on other debuffs? So as you can see here, the enemies are debuffed with defense down, and yep, they do in fact increase her Hell Hand stacks. How does the AI work on multiple enemies? So if the skill is on cooldown, she will actually prioritize using her S2. What if there are less enemies to attack? She will still use her S2 to attack multiple enemies. If there's only one enemy and she has her cooldowns, what skill will she prioritize to use? So she will actually use her S3 here instead of her S1. But if it is on cooldown, she will proceed to use her S1 on the lone target. How does she work in Apep? So I'm actually going to play a run of a full Apep run, and as you can see here, she will just use her S3 and S2 when it comes to the waves, because there are multiple enemies and none of them have any higher or lower priority than the other, so she will just use her S3 and S2 as normal if they are on cooldown or not. But later on, when we get to the boss phase, you will see here that she will actually prioritize using her S1 and S3, not her S2. This is because the boss has like a higher priority, and she will not try to use the S2 to do damage to the adds, instead favoring the S1 where she will do more damage to the single target boss, and her S3 when it is on cooldown. So that's something you'll have to take into account when you are building her for Apep. How about in Desolate Lands? How does she work? So I'm going to play a full run of a Desolate Lands again, and as you will see here, I chose Shadowfire because when it comes to Shadow Stream and Shadow Gale, it's pretty much just a single target boss, so she will just always use her S1 and her S3. But when it comes to Shadowfire specifically, she has the option of using her S2 when it comes to the adds. So if we skip over here, you'll see that she will actually use her S2 to try to kill the adds. So obviously I don't have the relics for this, but she will use her S2 and her S3 prioritizing the damage on the adds, but when the boss is alone, she will just use her S1. So that is something to take into account. How about in Sonic Miracle? So in the Sonic Miracle, there is just one boss and one wave unit, and she will actually prioritize using her S1 here because there's only one unit. So she won't actually use her S2 to try to defense break the boss, but instead just use her S3 on cooldown and her S1 to try and kill the boss faster. What about in the Sonic Rift? So in the Sonic Rift, all these bosses or all these units have the exact same priority. They're just these all the same, so she will just use her S2 and her S3 to AoE the damage, and she will mostly use her S2 here. She won't use her S1 at all unless there's only one target left, so that's something that you have to take into account, which makes her actually pretty good for the Sonic Rift. What about the Infinite Miracle? So in the Infinite Miracle, there's actually a wave 1 that has all the same priority, and when it comes to the wave 2, there is sort of a boss unit. So how does she interact with that? When it comes to the wave 1, she will just normally use her skills as normal. If there's only one unit, she will use the S1. If there are multiple units, she will use the S2. So when it comes to the wave 2, she's going to act pretty much the same. She's going to prioritize using her S2 and her S3, and that doesn't really change anything so far. And if there's only one unit, she's going to use the S1. The boss doesn't actually have a higher priority, unlike for example in Apep or in Desolate Lands, so she will just continue to use her S2 as long as there are multiple enemies alive. So that's something to take into account, and that makes her pretty smart when it comes to the Infinity Tower. Now, what happens if she uses the Avatara set? So when she counterattacks, how does she actually function? Now, as you can see here, she will prioritize counterattacking with her S1, and this is actually something that we're going to see throughout all of this, is that her S1 is actually her priority when it comes to being called upon or when it comes to being counterattacked. Now, when it comes to being called or having to assist, she will prioritize using her S1, and this will consume all of her Hell Hand stacks. So that's something that you're gonna have to take into account. She won't actually be smart and choose her S2 to assist with, it's only going to prioritize her S1. Does she gain more Hell Hand stacks if there are multiple stacks of poison? So as you can see here, I have applied multiple stacks of poison, and you will see that she does actually gain multiple stacks of Hell Hand stacks per each poison stack. So that's something that's really good. How does she interact with Jiangman's Netherbloom? So as you can see here, there are multiple stacks of Netherbloom. She will use her skill and then gain multiple stacks for each Netherbloom. So each Netherbloom stack counts as one individual debuff. How does she work with Embla's Corrupted Seed? So as you can see here, Embla's Corrupted Seed has multiple stacks on it and it will detonate when it reaches 8. But if she uses her skill, Izanami will only gain 1 stack of Hell Hand stacks for the single Corrupted Seed stack. How does she work with Liao's Devour? So as you can see here, there's 1 unit devoured already and Izanami will use her S3. She will not do any damage, but she will gain Hell Hand stacks for the devoured unit. So that's something really interesting. How does her HP cap reduction work in tandem with Luo Yan? Now both of them do reduce the HP cap, and as you can see here, if we line up these two videos, you will see that they have roughly the same amount. And if you look at the healing specifically, the healing adds up to exactly the same, which is based on the max HP. So it doesn't matter the order on which the HP cap reduction, because it's both gonna add up anyway. But what is important is that actually Izanami will attack afterwards. So it's better to use Luo Yan first and then Izanami for the max amount of damage done. But in terms of the HP cap reduction, they're just entirely the same if they stack it up whatever order. So when it comes to her kit, I think that her AI is actually pretty smart for what it does. It's more or less accurate of when you want to use it. It's S1 if it's one target, and then if it's more than one target, it's S2. And that's really nice, and it does scale off her damage when there's less people for her S3, so that's always really good. The main exceptions are going to be basically bosses, where she'll prioritize using her S1 for damage. So think your Ritual Miracle, your Sentinel Hunt, your Desolate Lands. She's going to prioritize doing damage there, so she's not actually going to be landing the defense break and on her AoE, which is kind of sad, but it is what it is. You can always just manual it, but for auto, yeah, she's going to use her S1 for these bosses. The main exception is going to be for Desolate Lands, where in Shadowfire, she's actually going to be using her S2 for the ads for the portion, so that's actually pretty good AI there. And I think that this is coded like intentionally, where you're going to want her to be using her Hell's Hand for damage, so that's just gonna be what it is. So for Apep and for like Sentinel Hunt, yeah, she's gonna be using her S1, which is a shame, but it is what it is. But when it comes to for her counter attacks or for her assists, generally she's just going to be using her S1 as default. So think your Avatara, or for example Alice here, she's going to be using her S1. I'm just going to remove my glasses. But another thing that I really like about her is her speed lead, and obviously everyone's going crazy about the fact that she does have a universal 25% speed lead on like the first pure fighter. Ollie doesn't really count because he's kind of like a pseudo fighter. He has places otherwise, so that is really interesting. And overall, I do like her kit in that she has these no cooldown S1 and S2, AoE and single target. It is really nice, but we don't have the full control of the AI when it comes to the autoing, so that kind of does suck. Another thing is that I do think that her HP cap reduction does have a place and makes her very unique. It has a certain place because the only other unit that has this is Luo Yan, and Luo Yan actually does have a place at higher tier Point War, so that is really important to think about. And yeah, this is max HP cap reduction 20%, which is automatically reducing 20% from these heavy tank teams. So it's gonna be seen if it's gonna make speed cleaves come back, just because, well, yeah, now we can actually break through, because most of the tanks will just have 1/4 or 1/5 less their HP. So that's something that's gonna be really interesting, and we're gonna have to see it when it comes to live. Another thing is that, okay, so her Hell's Hand, right? Her Hell's Hand buff do go away on her S1, and that's really bad, because everyone thinks, oh yeah, she's not gonna be extending these debuffs. But here's what I like to think about it, right? I like to think that her Hell's Hands are consumables, and here's why. You get 6 stacks of these, and you will lose at most 1 every S2. But the thing is, you're not actually going to be using all of these stacks every time, because her cooldowns are on a 4-turn cooldown. So what are you gonna do with those extra 2 or maybe 3 Hell's Hand stacks? Well, you can convert them into damage, and that's how I like to think about it, is that honestly, the buff extension is really nice, but it's not mandatory, because, well, in PvP, for example, you don't actually need the buff extension if you're using her in speed cleave team. So if you don't need the buff extension, right, you don't need the Hell's Hand stack, so you might as well just use them for damage. You don't need, like, if you get 6 Hell's Hand stacks, what are you gonna do? Because you will gain 6 every 4 turns, like in an ideal scenario. So you want to try to consume them or use them for extra damage. And in PvE, for example, when it comes to like Calamity Tower or Ritual Miracles or whatever, you can make it so that like you will have the buffs around for the most part, or in like different comps, like for example in Apep, where you're going to be cycling throughout. The buffs don't even matter because like in different waves, you're going to be resetting your buffs anyway. So like, how useful is the Hell's Hand stack? I don't think it's really that useful if you want to keep it. So I think it's better off using it for damage. And okay, her multipliers are kind of low, but the thing is that like she's doing AoE damage. So yes, this is just 100%, right, or 110% at max, but that's 110% to freaking 5 different enemies. And when it comes to our Hell's Hand stack, yeah, okay, it's 75 at most, but let's say it's 55, and it's like 55 plus 15. Well, then suddenly you're doing 70% to 5 units, so that's like 350%. That's really, really good, actually. And when it comes to S1, okay, she does 100, 120 at most. But then that's plus another like almost 300% at 6 stacks, right? So yeah, like kind of think of it like that way. These Hell's Hand stacks are kind of consumable, and then you can actually use them up. It's okay if you use all of them up actually in the S1. It's actually okay. So that's how I like to think about it. I'm not sure if that's how it's actually gonna be, but I just like to think that it's a resource and we should be able to consume it and use it. Because what would you take, right? 400% attack or extend your buff by 1 turn? Like it's not that bad, okay? Like if you deal an extra 300% attack almost, that's great, that's good. And okay, another thing that I really love is the fact that she's R0able. You don't actually need her R2 and above because they don't actually do that much. So her R2, yeah, it will 100% consume a Hell's Hand stack, and that's okay, right? Like that's good because you want the extra damage 100% of the time, but it's not necessary. And obviously, well, yeah, R6 is here and you don't consume the Hell's Hand stacks on the S1. That's really, really nice, but it's not like mandatory, right? Her kit works perfectly well, perfectly useful. The speed lead is gonna be there. The HP cap reduction, which I think is her main selling point, they're all there. And AoE damage and single target damage, the choice will always be there. The R's, the resonances will just increase her damage or the chance of the damage. So I think that's all really, really nice. And yeah, she doesn't require skill ups because she doesn't actually reduce any of her cooldowns. She just increases her damage. So I don't think she needs any skilled up at all. And that's obviously really, really freaking awesome. She's a great R0 Esper. You can just get her. She's useful out of the box. You don't need to invest too much into her skill ups or resonances. So I think that she's really, really great. Overall, I think that she's definitely a must summon, at least for like R0, because like she's a very useful unit. I don't know if she's like a must summon for new players, but if you're a veteran player and you have the spare resources, she's definitely going to be useful. The speed lead, the cap reduction, the AoE damage for different content, or just the single target damage in different content, really, really nice. And she is very, very useful in Calamity Tower. She's the perfect unit for Calamity Tower almost. So yeah, that's really, really nice. So yeah, comment down below if you like this video, if you like the style of this video. I worked really hard on the MYTHBUSTERS section. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's Yuuhime, and I will see you guys in the next video. Get out of here.